welcome everyone. My name is Dorrie Fontaine. I'm Dean of the School of Nursing. And just to clarify, yes, women were here officially 1971 and on, but actually the School of Nursing, we have been educating since 1901. And I just wanted to put that out there. My alums will always appreciate that. So welcome to our first panel of the Women's Global Leadership Forum. Our topic is advancing health and education for women and girls through women's leadership in the global arena. There are many challenges, as we know, and our focus will be on what kind of leadership is required. To that end, we are honored to have 4 senior and emerging leaders with us today. As you will see, they represent government, multinational, as well as grassroots organizations. And they have strong and unique stories and perspectives and solutions for education and health for women and girls. Our first panelist is Dr. Agnes Binagwaho. Dr. Binagwaho is the Vice Chancellor of the University for Global Health Equity and former Minister of Health in Rwanda. In many high-level positions. I watched Dr. Binagwaho's leadership in action last Friday as we screened the documentary Bending the Arc about Paul Farmer and Partners in Health. Dr. Binagwaho is prominently featured as she stood up for vaccinations for HPV due to the ravages of cervical cancer in her country, as well as her leadership during the Ebola crisis. Next, we have Maya Ajmera. Ms. Ajmera is the president and CEO of the Society for Science and the Public and founded the Global Fund for Children, which has touched the lives of over 10 million children with a unique and highly successful grassroots approach. Her acclaimed book tells the story titled Invisible Children, Reimagining International Development at the Grassroots. Dr. Vivian Penn. Dr. Pinn is a UVA School of Medicine 1967 graduate and the only woman and African American in her class. She was the first full-time director of the Office of Research in Women's Health at the National Institutes of Health. Her illustrious career has included teaching and leadership positions at Howard University, Harvard, and Tufts Medical Schools. And since her retirement in 2011, she was named as a Senior Scientist Emerita at the NIH Fogarty International Center. Dr. Pinn's work has included a focus on women and girls becoming investigators and participants in global research. A few months ago, I was lucky enough to be present for the fitting renaming of a research building, Pinn Hall, in the School of Medicine in her honor. That was really just 2 months ago. It was a beautiful celebration of a life of strong leadership and truly a complete love fest of colleagues, family, and former students from across the globe. And I am pleased to welcome back to UVA our 4th panelist, Ms. Abinet Sitotaw. As a recipient of the 2017 Mandela Washington Fellowship hosted by the Presidential Precinct, Ms. Sitotaw participated, and I understand she loved her time in the program this past summer. She's a gender and nutrition advisor for CARE-Ethiopia. She also supports the election of women to parliament in her country. Our facilitator today is Dr. Rebecca Dillingham. She's the director of the University of Virginia Center for Global Health, which is a trans-university center that supports the development of leaders for global health from across grounds. It is Rebecca Dillingham's wisdom in partnerships across not just our university, but throughout the world, built on her powerful relationships and, as our first speaker said, listening. So I know that we have a dynamic team and panel here with powerful ideas, so please join me in welcoming them.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here for this exciting panel. It is an absolute privilege to be able to be here as a part of this conversation and to have the opportunity to listen to the incredible stories that these women have to share of their leadership for the health and education of women. I'd also like to thank Dean Fontaine for her wonderful introductions and for her enduring leadership in nursing, and which is, of course, a key component of promoting the health of women. So, as I'm sure you would all like to know more about the stories of these incredible people in front of us, I will ask first that our panelists tell us a little bit about your personal trajectory towards becoming involved in promoting the health and education of women and girls. And I will turn to my immediate left to ask Dr. Binagwaho to begin.
So, it's always complex, but I always want to care when I was a little girl. And I was educated in Europe. My family didn't want to come back because we were not welcome and killings were there in our country, targeting families like mine. So I was born without learning my language, my culture, nothing. I was a very great, stubborn little Belgian. And when I grew up, I joined the medical school and I became a doctor. I want to go back to Africa, but not in Rwanda. And I went in Gabon, and there I found the power, the traditional power given to wise women. Ladies, what we have here is nothing. When the tradition keep the place of the woman where they are, great. It was a matriarchal society among a lot of patriarchal society. So I came back to do a residency. I'm a pediatrician. And then after the genocide, the father of my two kids decided to go back to Rwanda. We resist a lot because I knew nothing about that country. And finally, I went for multiple reasons, notably my two beautiful girls. It's not easy to be a single mom. And when I arrived there, I want to run away because there was nothing I can do because I learned to provide care in another setting. But I decided to stay after fighting with myself. But I decided to stay because children were dying so much. And somebody had to do something. So I stayed and I built the health sector I needed. I contributed, I'm not the only one. With many others, we built the health sector where I can provide the care. But doing so in a society where, I guess, when we are going to talk, like all society, women are always behind, even here, are always behind the men. We needed to give a positive discrimination to push women, at least, to be equal. We did that so well that our parliament have almost 70% of women in parliament. And now men scream for support. That's good. That's good. No, fine. We help them, but it's good to hear. But education is an absolutely tool for development. And when you want to develop, you need to provide health, you need to provide education. And that's how giving a positive advantage to little girls, to women at workplace, because they work like here, and after that they have to come home and work at home, and after that the kid is sick, they have to stay with the kid and recover the time at work because the boss is not happy. So working on all those things, changing the society and educate the maximum of women. So that's how I came.
Thank you. What an incredible story. I'd like to move next.
So it's a pleasure to be here. So my story begins is that I'm the daughter of Indian immigrants. I grew up in eastern North Carolina, in Greenville. My dad was a professor of physics at East Carolina University. I was on a trajectory to become a scientist or engineer, majored in neuroscience at Bryn Mawr College, but got a fellowship when I was 22 years old to go to South and Southeast Asia to travel and study. And I had wonderful professors who said to me, Maya, if you really want to understand people and understand their lives, get a backpack and start traveling for a year. And so I traveled from Thailand to Pakistan for 1 year. And it was there that I started seeing homegrown innovations taking place in people's own communities. And it was in one place in India, in a town called Bhubaneswar. And I don't know if you've ever been to a train station in India, but they're very chaotic places. And I got off at this train station, and among this chaos, I saw 50 kids, mostly girls, and their siblings, learning how to read and write. And there was a teacher in the middle teaching them with flashcards, and these kids were mesmerized. And they were obviously quite destitute. And I asked the teacher, I speak Hindi, she spoke some Hindi as well, but we were able to speak, and I said, what's going on here? And she said, well, these children live on and around the train platforms. They work, they play, they beg, they eat, they don't go to school. So a teacher in that community said, I'm going to bring the school to the train platform, and I'm going to create a train platform school. And I asked, well, how much does it cost to run one of these schools? And she said, well, it costs, in dollars at that time, it cost $400 a year with 2 teachers and a hot meal every day to give education to 50 kids. And I was 22, and I started thinking, well, that's not a lot of money. How do I help? And how come I don't see more train platform schools all over India? So, to my parents' chagrin, I didn't go and get my MD, PhD at Duke. I ended up getting my master's in public policy at Duke University, and started imagining what it would take to support these innovative grassroots entrepreneurs who are really making changes in their communities for children. And I founded the Global Fund for Children when I was 24 years old, with seed capital from a group called Echoing Green that supports social entrepreneurs. And with $25,000 in seed capital, I went to it. And for 17 years, we built one of the largest networks of grassroots organizations supporting children, but many of those organizations supporting girls and adolescent girls. And to date, we've invested $40 million in over 700 NGOs, touching the lives of 10 million children. Thank you. As any social entrepreneur or founder, you realize that you can keep doing this for the rest of your life or do something totally different. So I went back to my scientific roots and now lead an organization called the Society for Science and the Public. But there, I'm incredibly committed. It's a spectrum of supporting girls, adolescent girls, and women. And I've had the chance to do this for very poor girls and young women, and now looking at the opportunities of really supporting girls and women to become the next generation of scientists and engineers in our world to solve the world's most intractable problems. And so I'm on this spectrum of supporting girls around this idea of education and for them to dream and become whatever they want to be.
Incredible stories of transformational change at the level of the government and the grassroots. And now I'd like to pass the mic, so to speak, to Dr. Vivian Penn.
Well, I didn't grow up anywhere exciting. Actually, it was exciting for me. But I grew up in Lynchburg, right down the road. An easy stone's throw from Charlottesville. And I think because of illness in my family and helping to take care of my ill grandparents, I'm told at the age of 4 that I decided I wanted to be a pediatrician, maybe because the only doctors that I knew were the general practitioners. Those were the days that doctors came to your home and made house calls, and my own pediatrician. But then I lost my mother when I was 19, and I remember going to the physician with her when she had severe back pain, and And I can still recall that physician saying to my mother, if you did those exercises and put on those Oxford shoes I told you to wear, you wouldn't have this pain, only to learn that he had missed the bone cancer that she had in her hip, obviously had never taken an x-ray. And at that point, I can still remember being in his office and hearing and making up my mind to do essentially what Senator Capito said, which is, if I do become a physician, I and anybody that I teach must learn to listen to women when they talk about their health and their bodies, because obviously my mother knew something was wrong. It wasn't just her posture. And I think if you talk to any of my students, that thousands that I've taught over the years, they'll tell you that's something that I've emphasized, listening instead of being godlike and telling you what you might not know about your body. But after my mother's death, I then had, and I had taken time out of school to take care of her during her final 6 months of life. And because of that, having a semester to make up at Wellesley, which is where I went, another women's college, I got a summer job which got me involved in research. And that really introduced me into the field of research. And, you know, everybody, I think, grows up. I grew up in Lynchburg saying I wanted to do cancer research, having no idea what cancer research was. I just knew research was important. And I learned really what research is about and what truly research can do and how important it is in changing how health policy, health care, and even our own attitudes about health can change. And then I applied to the University of Virginia to go to medical school because I wanted to come be closer to my father, who was still in Lynchburg because of the death of my mother. Not having any idea that when I went into that first morning's class, I wasn't here as early as the beginning of the nursing school, but it was before, it was in the fall of 1963. And thinking that when I looked around the room and saw only white men, that the other women and people of color must just be late getting there until the dean called the roll, and I realized that I was it, that it was me and my classmates. But I had some classmates who reached out, and I did have 4 years. There were challenges, but I think wonderful years. You can see I'm still loyal to UVA, and I'm still coming back. We just had our 50th class reunion. But I actually trained as a pathologist. I said I got into research, and as actually a kidney and transplant pathologist, because that was what my summer experience had been. And many think when they hear that I've been so involved in women's health, I must be a gynecologist. But I think it's the broad viewpoint of a pathologist who sort of has to know you from head to toe that I hope has really helped us with how we have begun to redefine women's health in this country and around the world, because you have a total perspective. It was in 1991 when I was at a meeting at the National Institutes of Health, actually representing the Fogarty International Center, because I was on the board of Fogarty at that time, when Dr. Bernadine Healy, who was the first, in fact, the only woman to serve as the director of the National Institutes of Health, announced at this meeting this new office. Now, and that it was going to focus on research on women's health. Well, you can imagine there were very few women in medicine in the 60s, in the 70s, and the 80s, and we're talking about early 1991. I'd often been the only woman at meetings, the only woman on rounds, the only woman in a group, and I had seen not so much disrespect for women, but things that may have been minimized when they were coming from women. And I still was thinking back, you know, maybe if you listen to women and thinking about the experience with my mother. And obviously, I should say, I didn't become a pediatrician because when I got here and got to medical school, I learned that the guys all assumed any woman in medicine was going to be a pediatrician because we were good with babies, and I'd never done what everybody expected me to do. But even my father was surprised when I became a pathologist, but that was because of the research. But they were talking about this new office, and I had actually taught Dr. Healy when she was a Harvard medical student. And she asked me to come out to meet with her and asked me to come take this position to head up this new office of research on women's health. And my immediate response was, I'd love to do that because I can see the need to pay attention to women's health, to expand our concepts. And I just had all these ideas. But then I thought about me. You can see how shy I am, and I thought, I really don't think I dare give up a full professorship, a department chairmanship, to come into government, because I like to say what I think, and I don't think I will last long. And she suggested I try it, and I did learn about a little more tact and how to say, and I survived and actually retired. I didn't get put out, I retired after 20 years, and I'm still connected. But that to say, I'm speaking up for women's issues, yes, and perhaps we'll get into this a little later, but that really changed my whole life and my career, but really focusing on something that had been important to me all my life, that is, what about the health of girls and women? What about women getting into careers in medicine, seeing the change and the shift? And if research is going to really determine health policies and health practice and standards of health care, are we really looking at women or assuming that women do the research in men and assume women are just like men, just put skirts on them and they're going to behave the same way? And here was an opportunity when there was a rich time. The Congress was interested. The media was beginning to focus on women's health. You were seeing fewer articles about how to keep your husband alive from heart disease, rather how to keep yourself and your spouse alive from heart disease. I couldn't think of a better time to focus my energy on women's health. And I must say the last 25 years have really been exciting for me and fulfilling. And hopefully there is some legacy there for not what I did, but for those that, all of you and all of those who worked with me to change our landscape about how we view women's health and necessarily also how we approach the design of research studies today in this country and actually around the world.
Thank you for your service and for taking your dream and making it a reality for so many of us.
Thank you.
Abinet.
Okay, so you see me along with accomplished women. I cannot say I am as accomplished as they are, but I am as accomplished as who I am right now. So I'm happy to be with you. I'm happy for the chance. And before I go on into answering your questions, I would love to mention how I get here today and to speak before you. So post the Mandela Washington Fellowship, there are different opportunities, including the Speaker's Travel Grant. So Stuart was earlier saying, we had to find out a way to get here, right? So I applied for the Speaker Travel Grant, and through the generous support from the USAID, through the IREX, I'm here, and also my organization supported me. But that would mean the money that goes to my travel is from each one of your pocket. You're the taxpayers, and I would love to thank you so much. Having said that, talking about why I am so much interested in women and girls, and women empowerment and girls empowerment, and where did it come from is a question, actually. So it came from my own experience, my mother's experience. So my mother was married at the age of 13, and she's not educated, so she's a victim of early marriage. She had to give birth to 4 daughters, including myself, and she had to struggle to raise us up. And in a patriarchal society where she was supposed to be a subordinate, it was very difficult for her to raise 4 kids. So I get to thinking, why is she not in school? Why was she sent to school? Why was she denied the right to education? And why would she decide to send me to school? Why am I here today and she's not? Isn't it because of my education? So I said to myself, I have to have a commitment to support young girls, young women to go to school so that they don't end up being, in the house and as wives and as women who are going to be destined to raise children, right? So my mother's story, and she used to tell me actually, so you are my way out from poverty, and the key is your education. So I managed to do that. I managed to provide for my mother because she gave me the education I really wanted to have, and she was denied that right. So for me, the key for women's success, women empowerment, is girls' education. We cannot just expect women to become leaders if we don't invest in their education. Currently, out of 5 girls, one will get married at the age of 15 in Ethiopia. So what does that tell you? Still, there is early marriage. There are harmful traditional practices that would keep women in the house. As we grow, there's a saying, as we grow, women grow roots in the domestic sphere and men grow wings so that they go ahead and explore the world. So education is good for them, and everything and anything else is, the enabling environment is there for boys and men, but not for girls and women. So that's why my inspiration, my dedication to empower women and work around gender equality, women's empowerment, came from my mother's own story. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a few questions for the panel, and I'm going to move down the panel, letting each one of you go first so that we're not always in the same order. So Maya, this first question will actually start with you. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit, amongst all of the priorities, what is your top priority right now for improving the health and education of women and girls?
Me.
Maya.
Me, that's right. So, I look at the improvement of the lives of girls and young women on a spectrum. And for me, the priorities that I believe are absolutely critical are 3 things. One is that we have to get the education of girls at the secondary school level globally up. This is a very, the primary school, through the Sustainable Development Goals in the UN, they've really achieved great success in getting primary school admissions very high. But secondary school has to really be an emphasis. I think the second piece of this, and I may be a bit politically incorrect here, but what we're seeing, and through my research right now, is that in many parts of the world, you're seeing more girls in school than boys. There are more street children in the world who are boys than there are girls. And we're starting to see real pockets, and we can go into that a little later, about what's going on with boys and young men globally. And so part of improving the lot of girls and young women is improving the lot of boys and young men. So I carry that together in the same sort of discussion. And then the third piece is that I really look to a group of young women around the world who are in high school and in university, who are dreaming and want to become doctors, want to become scientists, they want to become researchers and engineers. How do we make that playing field equal for those young women to become the next generation of scientists and engineers, really to solve the world's most intractable problems? Because that discrepancy is very big and it needs to close.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up question. In the secondary education, what is the gap? Are girls falling off at that point, or are there not enough secondary schools?
It's a combination of things. One is not enough schools. 2, girls drop out. 3, they have to work or become caretakers of their siblings at home. It's a whole host of reasons. And also the secondary school systems in many parts of the world just isn't up to par. It needs to be improved. So I think there's a great deal of work that needs to be done on the secondary school system, and in this country as well.
Thank you. Dr. Pinn, I'll pass to you.
Well, I think I can pick up on what you just said, because I actually just finish next month a many-year term on the Committee on Women in Science, Engineering, and Medicine of the National Academy of Science, National Academy of Engineering, and National Academy of Medicine, where we've looked at many of these same issues, not just in the U.S., but globally. And I can support much of what you've said. I mean, in addition to our efforts to stress and provide opportunities for girls and women to enter in biomedical careers, for research, science, dentistry, healthcare careers across the board, looking at engineering and looking at just fields of science, that we see the pipeline issue, and I hate that term pipeline, but it's sort of there, but pipeline issues we've dealt with much better with role modeling and mentoring, but where we have lost really is when women get into these fields, and our major thrust these days is looking at what happens in terms of sustained success, sustained leadership, and dealing with some of the issues that are coming forward. And she hits another, probably people get surprised because here I've been talking women's health, women's careers for all my life, and then especially the last 25 years, everything is women's. Well, that's what my office was about. But you're right, for medicine in this country, for example, the crisis is that of black males. We're seeing more women come into medical school. The number of males still exceeds that of females. But if you look at black males, it's being called a crisis. We have a conference coming up at the National Academies in next week after next, to look at that crisis, which means that when we're looking at both girls and boys at the early stage, that there has to be educational intervention at the very early stages and a follow through with both men and support and encouragement, as well as the financial burden that we see going forward. But just to back up a little bit, again, another point that she made, which I would concur with strongly, that is looking at careers and the effects on careers of women who do research, careers of women who are involved in science or healthcare careers, that dual responsibility of being a professional outside of the home or in the home, and then those family responsibilities. And while we've seen an improvement, I think, in the sharing of these responsibilities, and we've gotten away from talking about women-friendly policies for things like flex time for promotion or sharing time at work to be able to do these things, we really need to think more about these in terms of family-friendly policies for sharing among both. If you look at what have been barriers to women getting ahead over the years, many of them fall back into we can talk about the dual responsibilities, but what I now sort of categorize as historical and traditional stereotypical attitudes. We talk about unconscious bias, we talk about sexism, racism. If you think about it, it's really based in sort of the traditional stereotypes that we grow up with and become accustomed to. And I think that's the area that we really have to change. And without going more and more on what we've done, I think really I can support and concur what you've said, and I think we see it not just in the U.S., but in the global community.
Thank you. And Abinet, does that resonate? Do those comments resonate with you?
Very much. Yes, very much. So I would love to talk about my priorities in twofold. The first one is my professional engagement with CARE-Ethiopia. I work for CARE-Ethiopia as a gender and nutrition advisor, and my personal mission of empowering girls through enhancing especially secondary education. So I would start from that, since it really highly resonates with what Maya said earlier. So for me, coming to the US this past summer and attending the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program at the Presidential Precinct really pressed me into thinking what I need to do before, I die. So I want to do this before I die thing was at the back of my head. So getting at the Presidential Precinct, they would really seriously force you into thinking, what is this essential question that you would really want to answer? So, I told myself, this essential question I have at the back of my head should stay there until some time. I cannot do it now. It's a huge thing. I want to do something bigger than myself, so it should stay there. And after they ask you to think about your essential question, they'll just go ahead and teach you so many topics, expose you to so many great individuals, women leaders, peer collaborators, and things like that. So you cannot stop thinking about your essential question. Then finally, it ended up to be my project idea. So I told myself, this is, the teaching process and everything would tell you, you can accomplish something through collaboration if you really want to do it. So you don't have to wait until you die or until you get older. While you are young and passionate, you can also think about pursuing your own, project agenda. And thanks to the presidential precinct, I made the before I die kind of question my project. So that would mean I would really want to build a school, secondary school. It's not going to be just a school, but it's going to be a leadership academy whereby I managed to bring rural young girls, who could not attend secondary schools to the city and give them, a boarding school whereby they're getting state-of-the-art secondary education and also leadership skills training, but not only for, women only or girls only. I am also thinking about expanding this project idea into incorporating fewer boys, also underprivileged boys from the rural area as a strategy to engage boys because, the problem is not only with our girls. We need support. We need to be creating an enabling environment for our girls to flourish. So that's one of the focus areas that I am working at currently, which is trying to collaborate with different individuals, including foundations. They're established here in the US. I'm trying to communicate with them so that I bring this school idea into life and help our girls get the quality secondary education. And why secondary education? The EFA goal, Education for All goal, managed to make sure that at least primary education is covered, right? So everybody in trying to be politically correct or in trying to believe in the fact that girls should go to school, they're sending their girls to school. It's getting better every day. We're saying even if you see the reports, you learn that more girls are going to school now. So when you go higher in the educational ladder, it gets worse. So secondary education, when I did my research, I found out that for about 11 primary schools, you only have one secondary school in my country. What does that tell you? So that's one is access, right? And quality, well, we can talk about quality as well. And also, when we get higher to the tertiary level, while we have like almost 51% women in our population, enrollment rate is still like at 33% in my country at the tertiary level. And you can also talk about the academic staff proportionality to the male academic staff. Why is this happening? And if you go ahead and explore, the highest paying jobs, the leadership positions, and everything is taken by our good men, huh? What happened to our good women as well? Where are they? Because, we don't produce them. We have 33% enrollment, and the attrition rate is higher at the tertiary level, and you again expect equality in the workplace, in the parliament, and everywhere. You cannot have them unless you work in sending our girls to school. And by school, I'm referring to primary, secondary, and tertiary school level as a whole. So that's like my personal mission. I'm so enthusiastic about it. I would really love a support from anybody and everybody else. So my professional engagement, I work for CARE-Ethiopia, as I told you. And I really love working for CARE because its mission is my mission. In CARE-Ethiopia, the motto is defending dignity and fighting poverty. What does that mean? So if you want to fight poverty, who is the most affected by poverty? Isn't that clear? It's women and the girls, right? So CARE-Ethiopia's mission is to women empowerment and girls empowerment. And we have different projects, including in health, agriculture, and nutrition. So as an advisor on gender, I get to consult with different project leaders on how they should be able to, support girls and support women in their respective projects. And one interesting framework for CARE-Ethiopia is the the gender equality and women's voice framework. So this framework's theory of change states that if you want to bring change in women's and girls' life, you have to think about three things. One is building their agency. For example, you can talk about enhancing self-esteem of girls. Then girls cannot do it. You build their capacity, and when they go out, their relationship is subordinate in the society. Because it's like the patriarchal society wouldn't allow for girls to, experience that self-esteem you have been teaching them for a while now. So you have to think about their agency. Then also you have to think about their relationship. How are they, relating to their family members, men and other women? So you have to, again, work on their relationship. And relationship alone cannot take you somewhere unless you also work on the structure and the policies and things like that. So the agency relations structure framework will highly support my thinking towards gender equality and women empowerment, and I focus on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abinet. Yeah. Dr. Binagwaho, are there issues that you'd like to amplify or introduce?
A little bit of everything is great, and put that in a global perspective. And I would like, if you look, it's cultural, it is social violence, structural violence, with all the things that is linked with that. And it starts at birth. Women breastfeed more their boys than their girls. What does it mean? Good question for research. Is it because men, the baby boys are the weak? They are weak. We are the strong biological sex. We all know that. They die more. Maybe it's a reaction for keep the boy alive because they know that through that little boy, if he became a strong man, the family will be safe. Cultural thing. So there are so many things to do. The girls are in primary school. Okay, but what do they learn? All the example of greatness are men in the books, and all the example of submission are female, isn't it? So, can we change that? Now they go to secondary school. Okay, there is not enough secondary school, and also, what is the necessity to go and be educated? You'll be a woman at home. And those women who are educated are so arrogant. They have a voice and an opinion on everything. They put trouble in the family, isn't it? So this also has to be changed. It's culture and structural violence, and it's across culture and across society. Now, the women who are finding their way and going there in the top, when they own more than the husband, problem at home. So what they do to compensate, they wash more the kids, they wash more the dish, and they are more tired. That also we need to change. And even when they are going there up, and they are even going to lead the world, now you have all the things that are against this, because even the good people start to be gender insensitive. So we need to change culture, structural violence at every level. Even the way we perceive, when an university in this country recruits more women than men, the value of that university go down. What the hell? Is it is it how Wall Street is doing with value? No. So this also needs to change. So even when women find their way, because they are there, the value of being there is less. We need to change that. So anthropological studies are psychological, cultural, and that's true that little boys are sometime after breastfeeding period neglected, but we still see too many fake men there when we have fantastic women around there that never find their way just because they are women. So don't change the deal and the work too early. Still push girls to go up there. And the best way is equity.
Yes.
If we have more women in primary school because we have almost more girls at age to go to primary school than men. So it's good. And we should have 50% of female at all stage of the chain and the cycle of life, and share.
So I'm noticing that we do have some men in the audience today, and thank you so much for being
There are
here.
always some courageous ones.
Let's give them a round of applause. And I'd like to stay with you actually for just a moment, Dr. Binagwaho. Your country has had such an incredible and really inspiring transformation. And I think it's a model for us all. And I'm wondering about how to build allies amongst all people, and particularly men, for the development of the kind of equity you're talking about. And perhaps the panel can also speak at different levels about how that might happen.
If we want to build equity, it has to be coming from everybody, because it's not a portion of the society that can bring equity to all the others. So, and it can only be by sitting together and say, okay, this group is disadvantaged, how can we give them a discriminative positive advantage for them to raise up to the other level? And think about that, but also provide to each and everyone what they need. We have more than 65 or 68, I don't remember how much, parliament representative in a country where educated women are less in number than men. So imagine the huge positive advantage we give to women. And how it happened is just because the Constitution passed and the ruling party convinced people to vote that if 30% of women the 30% of positions are not occupied by women or men, elections are cancelled. You don't need Russian or anyone, cancelled, just because we didn't meet the number. Can you imagine? So all the party to be there has pushed the women. What happened is that the women that were pushed for the party to have a seat were not at task, didn't know what a law is, didn't know what to do. No problem, the country take a breath and take 1 year to educate them. What is a law? How do you do a law? What is the risk, etc. Now they are fantastic, you see. So give and this is coming together, decide to break to fill the gap, and see how in your setting, your environment, you can do that on the benefit of all, not women only, not men only, all. And also do things like, okay, the science proves us that major killer of women is cervical cancer. And there is a vaccine. What a criminal thing not to give that vaccine to the girl. And the problem in my country is women didn't know that they had a cervix. They didn't know what cancer is because our big problem was HIV, TB, malaria, infectious disease. So take a breath, go, they have a brain, a great brain, and explain. You know, we have an uterus, we have a cervix, etc. After that, they're all there. I want my kids to be vaccinated. 96% of the kids vaccinated first attempt. And today, age 12 to 20, 93% of the girls in Rwanda are vaccinated.
That's higher than the US.
Yeah. And you do that, of course, not only by convincing mothers. You convince father.
Yeah.
So what you do, you explain to the fathers that, you know, your wife, she has a cervix. What is a cervix? Da, 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 da. And you go, you take a breath, you explain. So dialogue, cultural shift, respect, and also knowing how you can reach there. You reach there sometime by explaining to the pastor that women have a cervix. The religious, the press, the community leaders, all the people that those men and those women are trust, because they trust them more than they trust me. So it's an approach that has a philosophy behind that we teach in the University of Global Health Equity, equity first, meaning not for one or not for the other. And also leave nobody out. So the vulnerable are the first target. And to get 93%, target the most vulnerable girl. If you reach that girl, all the others will come there because they find their way. The parents are educated, etc. So leave no one behind, respect, and target the vulnerable.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
I think she said it all. I think she said it beautifully.
Anything else?
Well, yes, and I just was sitting here just gloating over what you were saying and take a particular interest in the HPV vaccine because I was at NIH then, and the original research to develop that vaccine was by Doug Lowy and a couple of guys at the National Cancer Institute. And my office was able to fund, when they came to us saying it's moving ahead in research faster than they had expected, and we're looking for some extra funds to start the clinical trials, most of which were early on in Costa Rica, and we were able to do that. And I remember saying that I expected one of the greatest advances in women's health research would be related to the vaccine, because really no one should be dying of cervical cancer. And yet we've been working for years trying to develop a vaccine for HIV and for other things, and that if this were to work, it would be the first vaccine ever that would prevent cancer, and it would be the first vaccine ever to prevent transmission of a sexually transmitted disease. And lo and behold, it went through the clinical trials faster, was expecting. They're still doing work on it. But as you described what happened and how you got such a high percentage of success in your country, when I think about here, when the vaccine was first introduced, there was such what I call sort of a socio-political reaction that I think much of the value of the scientific and medical value of that vaccine was lost for years in this country over what that socio-political approach. Who should be determinant? Why is it being given to girls? Is this going to increase their promiscuity? Why should boys or why should boys not be? Who should be determined? It's the school board, the doctors, the politicians, and all of that came up. And for many, it was a long while before we're just beginning to see a real increase in rates. But if we had had that kind, and we're beginning to see a decline in cervical cancer, not just here but around the world, and probably more so around the world where it's a major problem. But it does show, and it demonstrated, especially to me, because even in my position, I tried to sit back and learn and watch what was happening, and it showed me that science in itself can't do it all. We have to deal with the circumstances, the cultures, and the politics, and all of those things that influence the recognition of science. And I think even today we're dealing with, fake science as opposed to what has been demonstrated or is demonstrated by science. Your original question was about working with men. And I must say that for the Office of Research on Women's Health, just as before, but you can imagine coming up in medicine, me and all the guys in my class, and very few women after that, that it was natural to work with men and to understand that it was important. We have a conference on women, and they're only women. That doesn't help us deal with once you walk out of the room, the real world. I remember I went to speak at, I won't say which university, but a university in the Mid-South, and it was to talk on women's health. And one of my best friends was the chair of the PATH department there. And he picked me up at the airport and he said, well, I'd love to come hear your talk, but I'm told that no men are allowed at this talk on women's health. And I was just floored. So, of course, I changed my talk to talk about the importance of both men and women understanding about women's health and women's careers. We're seeing this, so I made sure that we had men as part of every discussion, every committee, sort of the reverse, because, just as we're seeing that demands from on top that women be part of every committee, every program, every symposium, so that you've got that viewpoint of women. Obviously, we were going to have that in our office, so I made sure we had representation the other way. But just thinking about health, what you described for cervical cancer, we see that in many countries of the world still related to breast cancer, where women don't come in to be seen for breast cancer because they're afraid of how their husbands will view them or will not view them if they feel that other men have seen their breast or feel they've got some lesion of the breast. And there are countries that I visited, and probably you all may know more of that than I do, but certainly we see that, and that takes me back to the 40s and 50s in this country, but we're slowly making progress. So the bottom line, short answer is, yes, it is important, and there are ways that we must involve both men and women. We would have a fit if men were doing something and excluding women, so why should we do the reverse and exclude men? And it just makes it easier when you walk out of the room, because we do need. Now, women, I agree, are strong, and we can be, and most often are, the agents of change, but it doesn't hurt to have our colleagues go along with it.
I think the debate are starting, but I talk about inclusiveness.
Yes.
Women will never do anything women please. Ring the men and convince them. I agree. And our HPV vaccine rate is just because I told you, we convince the mother, but the father, the religious leader, local leaders. So it's wider than the division man-woman. It put the kid in the center and see who is important in the society for this kid. Those are the people you need to convince. And then it's so easy.
So I would just say one quick thing is that we can create really innovative national policies, such as vaccinating girls, it's HPV. But I think the one missing ingredient that I think we have to do a better job on is how we communicate to the grassroots and the education at the grassroots. And I think there's been a real, I don't know if the word is mismatch or just not talking to each other, but we have to do more. The top down is just not going to work if you're going to create change. And I think we've had a very top down mentality, and I truly believe that the change agents in this world are at the local level. They're the grassroots entrepreneurs, they're the innovators, they're your local politicians. They're the ones where resources really need to get put into, because I think they're starved. I think they've been starved in this country, but I see that starvation, in a lot of other countries. So I'm just going to put a plug for, if we're going to reach people, it's the grassroots.
Very important. And the best advocate of our HPV vaccine, this great innovation, was our community health workers, primary level education, the star of the world. You see, you can say so many things.
I know. So we're not going to get through all my questions, but I'm going to ask one last one, and I'm going to direct it to you, Abinet. Dr. Pinn, I'm skipping you because you're at home, so we'll give Abinet the chance to be the first to answer my final question. I also would like you all to prepare yourselves to ask questions. We're going to be passing mics around, and we'll have about 15 minutes for that. So as you're thinking, get ready to raise your hands. And I would ask you to keep your questions short so that we have time to answer as many as possible. Okay, so Abinet, I'm wondering, we're sitting here celebrating our bicentennial here at the University of Virginia and looking forward to our next 200 years. And I'm wondering, what advice would you offer to an institute of higher education here or anywhere in order to truly promote the health of women and girls? And I think, as we've just heard, of all people moving forward.
Okay, before I answer that question, I would love to comment on men engagement a little bit. And I would like to ask you all to take it to your home. I mean, ask yourselves, if you have kids in the house, and boys and girls, how are you raising them? How do you differentiate between the roles between girls and boys? So it should all start from raising feminist boys and girls in your houses. You start by buying them toys. and you give a girl a kind of, cooking machines and things like that, you're ascribing her to her role in the future, while you're buying your boys airplane, guns, and things like that. What are you trying to communicate to your kids? So it should all start from raising feminist boys and girls in the house and trying to lead by example as well. What kind of parents are you in the house? We're not going to change the world if we don't start from ourselves. And the personal is political and theoretical. If you detach yourself from what you do out there, and you're so different when you go to the house and at the podium, that's going to be a problem. So I say, raising feminist boys and girls is very important to engaging men. And yes, for the higher education institutions, I would really would like to really, I have been working for Addis Ababa University, the oldest higher education institution in the country, for about 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I used to lead the gender office there too, and I used also to teach. So there were panel discussions like this regarding why we have less women academicians in the institute and not more men and things like that. And one time, I know of a couple who works for the university. They started while they were students. So the guy, he managed to become a professor. The woman, she struggled to hold her PhD. And I asked that person, what do you do? When you get home from teaching, what do you do? He said, I read, I watch the CNN, I correspond with international universities, I attend global workshops and things like that. And the woman, she should go home and cook for him. How do you expect a woman to become a professor in your institute while you don't even think about what happens to her when she goes home? So I would like to ask, institutions like UVA and others to take into consideration what women should live up to and their role in the society. It's not only limited to their career at your university. There are other factors involved for them to become professors. And, it's the same goes, either you publish or perish for academicians, right? How do we make sure that they publish with all those, roles involved or expectations for them to become, the homemaker and also the perfect wife figure? So I would say we should be, the universities have different missions for their teaching and learning, for their research, and for the community service. So mainstreaming gender into all this would require, to stop and think, okay, how many women do I have? Let me share one story, if you allow me. So one time, there was a restructuring in the university. And the university really wanted to have women as leaders or as deans, as department heads and things like that. So it was advertised. But no women show up to apply. So as a gender office head, I was communicated by the university president, and he asked me, we really want to have more women to the management now, and nobody's applying. Then nobody consulted my office when they set the criteria for application. I told him to his face, sir, your criteria was discriminatory in the first place. Have you seen the academic staff profile that you have produced? There is a booklet, and it states most of the women are MA holders in that particular university. And the criteria was assistant professors and above. So you're expecting to see more women applying to your positions, which are already limiting. It didn't even take into consideration how many women professors, how many women. In its 50 years of history, before I leave Addis Ababa University, we only managed to get one female professor from Ethiopia. That should be troubling to a management of an academic institution. So just should stop and ask why.
That's what to do to change that.
Exactly.
I have a solution. Every pregnancy should be considered as a mentoring of a future Nobel Prize
Yes.
and academic promotion. Isn't it?
I like that.
Thank you. That's, if you can do that, you will see the woman. And probably the Nobel Prize coming from here also.
I love it. Dr. Pinn, do you have thoughts to share on this? Advice for us?
Well, I think it just gets into points of leadership and things, barriers. How do we overcome some of the barriers to women being seen? The idea of how do we deal with what comes into gender bias, if you will, and getting more women into not just academic promotions, but the CEOs or in industry, or as you say, getting Nobel Prize or even getting elected to the national academies, international academies, where women are recognized. And part of that is that women can be agents of change. And as more women come in and exert and speak up, I like to ask when I'm speaking to, whether it's young students or to more professorial level folks, have you ever spoken up when you see an injustice or lack of gender equity for a colleague or for yourself? And it's much easier to do for a colleague because sometimes when you're just speaking up for yourself, it's seen as sort of a narrow, selfish thing. But imagine if you have colleagues who speak up for you, that you can bring about change. I like what you said you did and that you pointed out. And yes, we refer to that as institutional transformation, that a lot of what has contributed to the lack of women progressing has been due to the fact that they are being judged or have to work with criteria that was set by men related to men's responsibilities. Do you have rounds on Saturday morning or in the evening? One of the best things, and I'll give you this example, then I'll be quiet, but in talking about leadership for women and roles of leadership, women so often don't take advantage of things that could help them with family responsibilities because they're afraid it will stigmatize them as to not being competitive or on equal par. And we were having a workshop once on women in biomedical careers, and as usual, as I said, always had men involved. And the conference was running a little over. And one of the men on the panel, who was one of our leaders at NIH, put his hand up and said, I hate to say this, but I have to leave because I have to pick my son up at daycare. I thought that was probably the most important thing that happened at that whole workshop. Because how many women would say, I've got to leave to pick my child up at daycare, because they'd be afraid that it would then reflect on them as being less professional.
Yeah.
But when the man did it, it set an example that I have quoted over, and every time I see him, I remind him, maybe in fact he reminded me that that kid that he had to pick up at daycare is now in college. That's how long it's been. But to me, it's something that I have not forgotten. And that's why I think, again, it comes down to that partnership for both men and women, and then getting institutions of higher learning to recognize that we do need to transform how institutions set up their criteria. I call it institutional gender equity based on transparency. Transparency of requirements, transparency of criteria for whatever their roles are.
And I'll just piggyback on what everyone said is that two things that I think are absolutely critical for women, young women and women in academic institutions or in companies, government, academia, whatever, is the issue of mentorship. Mentorship is absolutely critical for men and women to mentor women. The other piece that we don't talk about is sponsorship. And sponsorship is really putting your social capital on the line and to really push a woman you believe in that should be put on a corporate board, that should be put on the UVA board, that should be tenured at the department. That sponsorship is just not enough, and I think we have to do more to sponsor women. And there's people think, oh, well, that's mentorship. It's not. Mentorship is going out and having coffee with someone and giving great career advice. It's about having lunch. Sponsorship is truly about your social capital and putting that on the line.
giving committee appointments, making sure they're
Yeah.
visible, they're seen, they're promoted.
Just like what you're doing for me.
Oh, I cannot agree more, because gender equity, it's even better than equality, and it is taking in account the biological function of a woman that we don't want to live. Imagine that all the women say, okay, to have a career, no more babies. Okay. Huh? Where are we going? We are dead, isn't it? So academic institutions need to take that in account. Give a breath to the woman to have family duty and do it well and with pleasure and with accomplishment, and push the men to go and take the kids in the daycare. But a discriminative advantage to compensate the great things the women are doing for the world. And this is there is enough brain here to find the solution. An example that it is about willingness. The private sector in my country doesn't take off as it should do better for our future. And one of the problems we saw in gender is that they don't want to recruit bright young women. Why? Because they're going to get married, have babies, have absenteeism, etc. So we decided to break that, you know how? By creating an insurance, so that when the private sector have to recruit somebody to replace a woman, doesn't have to pay something. We all pay 0.003% of our whole salaries, so that any private sector can tap in, say, oh, this woman, CEO or sweeper, is on maternity leave or sick leave for the kids. This insurance compensates. So if we have done that, imagine the brain you have here. Find something for academic that can inspire the world. And even, it was funny, because even the religious that doesn't marry and say, should we pay too? Say yes, because the kids are random.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And I'd like to turn now to the audience to see where the questions are. I see one in back.
Hi, thank you very much for the panel. My name is Danielle Hopkins. I'm the founder of Inclusive Finance Consulting, and I've done a lot of work with adolescent girls overseas, specifically with microfinance institutions and designing savings products and financial education programs for adolescent girls. And one of the things that we found was the importance of sensitization or raising awareness of parents. And a lot of times the girls would be going home to the parents, telling them about these savings accounts, and the parents wouldn't believe them. So I was wondering if you could talk, I think you guys have touched a little bit on parents, but just on kind of the role of parents and raising awareness and how that sort of factors in to getting buy-in of any particular program targeting adolescent girls. Thank you.
Maya?
So, what I've seen work the best through some of the CBO partners that have worked at the grassroots, really changing cultural beliefs, getting girls into school, making sure girls don't get married at an early age. I mean, savings accounts for adolescent girls when they work. I will tell you, again, it is face-to-face interaction. And it's someone who is considered respected from the community, who is working for your microfinance group on the grassroots, and getting them to come and speak to these parents door by door. It's that simple. I've also seen where grassroots organizations have actually created parent councils where other parents will go speak to other parents, so it's peer-to-peer. And it's something as simple as that, but you have to find your champions within that community, and knowing that those parents are actually going to listen to that person, or at least give them a thoughtful hearing.
Thank you. Next question. I'll go in the center.
Thank you very much. My name is Buki Shonibare, and I'm the founder of Girl Child Africa. I'm from Nigeria. I work with girls that have been abducted by Boko Haram. And I'm also one of the founders of the Bring Back Our Girls movement, advocating for the girls that were abducted. Now, one of the challenges that we have, and I've heard us talk about it, but I just want us to speak more to it. So one of the challenges that we face, particularly in the northeastern part of Nigeria, currently in Nigeria, there are about 14 to 18 million children out of school. Over 60% of that population are actually girls. But I get the need for us to get boys and men on the table in terms of discussing issues affecting women generally, health, education, and all of that. But I want to hear practical ideas, or especially for we young leaders that work at the grassroots level, that do projects at the grassroots level. How do we practically get boys and girls? Because by the time we empower these girls, they go out into a world where they mix with boys, and we've so raised the bar with them that the boys find it difficult, and we see that trickle even into marriages. How sometimes when women get so empowered, it becomes a bit more difficult for the men to deal with that. So how do we get boys and men involved in this whole work around issues affecting girls and women? Practically, what ideas have you seen, or what have you worked on that can help us, particularly at that grassroots level? Thank you very much.
So we should talk after this, but can I just say one amazing group that's been working on this and is now replicating this work is a group called Promundo. It's founded out of Brazil, but it works with boys and working with how boys work with girls. And it's everything from inclusivity and equity to gender sensitivity. And how do they create partnership? And I think that's a really interesting model, and Promundo actually has an office in Washington, D.C. So you should take a look at them, but I'm happy to talk to you afterwards.
And also don't forget what we said. Don't go for girls only. The world is bisexual and maybe more. At least consider those two sexes as a start.
We have time for one more question. Your smile got me.
Oh, I'm so happy. Thank you so much. I am from Uganda, and I'm so envious of Rwanda because we have all the nice policies, but implementation has become a big challenge. Although my question is about menstrual hygiene, because most of the girls that drop out in school, especially in Uganda, do not have access to menstrual hygiene materials, or maybe like sanitary towels and all that. Is that an issue in Rwanda and Ethiopia, and how are you addressing that?
It is. And not only it is an issue of dropout of school, because during menstruation, girls doesn't go to school. First of all, the toilets are too ugly, and also there is no space for change. And when you change, there is no space to wash, because the one use is too expensive. So there is a promotion of doing something with banana or even etc. So there are solutions that have to be local. Also, to have different type of toilet for girls, where there is a place for them. Don't have mixed toilets. But the worst we don't talk about is absenteeism of women teachers during menstruation for the same reason. So the kids are not taught correctly. So it is crucial for as much as you create school, to create appropriate latrine for the users. Agree.
I would love to touch upon the first two questions as well while responding to your question, especially about engaging, it's about engaging men and boys and also parents. So that model I talked about, the framework that I talked about earlier, that we cannot do it only by focusing on building women's agency. We should really be concerned about the relationship by relationship, I'm referring to the relationship that they have with their family members. For example, yours is access to finance, and it's a bit easier to convince parents, to allow their kids to have some kind of bank book and things like that, financial literacy, because money is involved and money is a good thing, right? So families, you could get an easy buy-in from a family member when you talk about financial literacy for kids. But about social norm transformation, there is when it gets even a bit tricky. Because, the norm holders it will start from the parents. The agents of socialization, we are agents of socialization, all of us. It will start from the family, it goes to the school and also the media, right? So the family, they're like the strong norm holders, and breaking that chain is very difficult, I understand. So, but you cannot do it only by focusing on building agency of young men and women. You have to be able to also work on their relationships. By relationships, whether it's gonna take you to create awareness for their families, for their neighborhood, and things like that. And also about the structure, the laws. You may have the laws. We have the law, for example, in Ethiopia, that you're not gonna marry your child who is under 18 years old. But as I told you earlier, 1 in 5 girls get married at the age of 15. So what happens? You have a law, but it's still happening. The parents would just fake her age and send her to marriage. So that would mean we have to work hard to transform these gender norms that we have in our communities. And it takes more than building just agency of women and girls. It requires you to really think about how you transform those social norms that are being upheld for so long by agents of socialization, including the mother, the father, the structures, and everything. So about the menstrual hygiene, while I was working for the university, the dropout rates for female students, as I said earlier, is higher compared to male students. And one of the research from the Ministry of Education indicated that, among others, financial problems and also financial problems to provide for yourself, your needs, including menstrual hygiene, as a factor for female students dropout. So what we have done is we have developed a program whereby donors can provide, it could be in kind or in cash, so that we buy sanitary napkins, sanitary pads, and we distribute it for free for girls from rural areas. And I'm very happy now, currently I'm seeing young students running a campaign, running a movement, and demanding for free sanitary napkins for students. And I really support that idea, and yes, that's a problem, a challenge in Ethiopia as well.
And it's already a cultural shift, because who talked about menstruation? Black. So it's a change. But for your question, you want young adolescents to do saving, please bring the spiritual leaders and the local leaders there. If not, they are going to say, they want to be like those white kids, impolite, respecting nothing like in Europe. Don't go there. You understand? So before even talking to young girls, talk to the local leaders and transform them. So they will be your best support.
With that, I'm going to stand and begin the applause for this tremendous panel. Thank you all for your attention, and I hope you'll have a chance to follow up with them during the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.